Today's gospel of the encounter of two disciples with the risen Lord has many levels of meaning to it. I would categorize these levels as physical, spiritual, and emotional. So let's start with the physical. At its basic level, this is a further example of Christ's resurrection being true. It is clear to Jesus' followers that he has truly risen from the dead. In other words, this is to dispel any notions that they were seeing a ghost, or that it was a figment of their imagination, or some kind of mass hallucination. In this encounter with his two disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jesus walks with his disciples. He talks with his disciples. He eats with his disciples. These are all things he had done with them before the resurrection. These were all the kind of things that humans do with one another. To be sure, his physical body was different than it was before the resurrection. He's able to walk through walls. He's able to appear quickly from one place to another. But it is clear that he is also the same Jesus who had walked with them, talked with them, and ate with them before. This appearance of Jesus occurs on the same day that he appears to the women at the empty tomb, and as we're told later, to Peter. The resurrection is the truth. And as I've said before, we can take confidence in that. No one would die for a lie. We see that in the Acts of the Apostles. Peter fearlessly proclaiming the resurrection as a truth. No one would allow their families to be persecuted, hunted, destroyed for a lie. A story that circulated at the time, the scriptures tell us, was that the disciples came and stole his body away. What's interesting to me is that recent stories have been that, well, they found a grave marked with the name Jesus, and that's where he's really buried. See, that's the problem. The unbelievers are the ones who can't get their story straight. Believers know what happened. Because why would they steal the body only to put it in a grave that was marked for everybody to see? But beyond the physical, there is also a spiritual meaning, a spiritual dimension. And this comes from how this encounter unfolds. Jesus breaks open the Word with these disciples. He explains the scriptures to them. They recognize him in the breaking of the bread. This is exactly how we, 2,000 years later, come to know the risen Christ. Here at the table of the Word, where the scriptures are broken open for us, where we come to know that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophets. And at the table of the Eucharist, with the breaking of the bread, we come to know that the risen Jesus is in our midst. We recognize his presence among us. And like those disciples, our hearts are ignited. We become on fire with love for the Lord. We want to go back and spread the good news. Our own plans disappear and are replaced by the desire to follow God's plan. It's interesting in this passage that only one of those disciples is named, Cleopas. I think that's intentional. We are the unnamed disciple. All of us are the ones who encounter the risen Christ, even as those two disciples encountered him those many, many years ago. And then finally, that third dimension that I mentioned is the emotional message. And I believe that too is as relevant for us today as it was for those disciples. Let's see how that unfolds. Jesus begins to walk with the disciples. They don't recognize him. And he begins with a simple question. Hey, what are you guys talking about? Wasn't anything out of the ordinary. That's exactly the kind of thing people traveling by foot from one place to another would do. Here are some strangers. Let's not be strangers. What are you guys talking about? You seem pretty enthused about it, or it seems pretty troubling to you, whatever it was. So Jesus asks them that, and what are we told? They stopped, looking downcast. They were depressed. They were anxious. They said to him, "Don't you follow the news? Don't you know what's happening? There's a pandemic going on. We're all stuck in our homes. It turns out God doesn't care about us after all." The Lord looks at them. "Oh, how foolish you are. God cares about you more than you can possibly imagine. Here, I'll show you. Take this bread, share this cup." And there he was, the risen Lord. The risen Christ makes all fear and anxiety vanish. It makes all the things we are so worried about and busy about in our daily lives seem insignificant and unimportant. Whatever those disciples had planned to do in Emmaus went right out the window. They turned 180 degrees about and headed right back to Jerusalem, the holy city. You think maybe their demeanor was a little different on the journey back? You think? Brothers and sisters, those disciples were not in a church when they broke open the Word. Those disciples were not in a church when they broke bread. The risen Lord can reveal himself to us at any time, in any place. And we can preach Christ risen in the same way, at any time, in any place. Brothers and sisters, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. In fact, I'm speaking on behalf of our clergy and our staff. When we began this lockdown, we were looking at about a $15,000 a week deficit for the parish, and that was something we wouldn't be able to sustain and would have incurred a lot of changes. And we made an appeal, and you stepped forward, as you always do, with great generosity and charity, and through your online giving and mailing in your contributions and the extra donations, one-time donations that you have made, we have cut that deficit down to $5,000 a week. So you've cut it down by 2/3, and that's just remarkable. And I know many of our new intercessions, we have our intercession basket there in front of the altar, which we are praying for at every Mass that we say here, and many of those are about the economic crisis that we're facing, which seems to be even more distressing than the virus crisis. We know that many of you have reduced salaries or without jobs or have other difficulties in the finances. And again, we understand that and completely respect that. Actually, I think mostly we're not asking for more contributions. We're just suggesting that maybe they could come in the form of an electronic gift, because that comes straight to us and can be put right into what few expenses we do still have. So again, just wanted to first of all thank you, and second of all tell you that our prayers are with you if you're suffering economically, and we definitely appreciate all that you give us and all that you contribute to the church to keep us running. So